So guys, how do you go about planning a trip to a national park? I've been to 26 national parks and counting, and I've developed my own system and ways on how to plan a visit to a national park that's the most efficient for me. Now, there's different goals when you go to different national parks depending on what you want. I want to see as much as I possibly can, and I try to seize the day. I try to wake up early, plan hikes very meticulously, plan the most efficient route. I try to make it the most efficient I can so I'm not wasting time driving back and forth when I don't have to. So, with wanting to plan it in great detail, the main reason behind that is I might not be there for a while. I might not be back to Yellowstone. I might not be back to Glacier for a long time. So, I want to do it as well as I can and see as much as I can in the short time that I have there. I try to pack my days full of things to do, so a lot of planning is necessary. So, why is planning to visit a national park very important? Well, more and more people are heading to national parks every day. It is a blessing and a curse for the national parks. It's great to see people out there and enjoying nature, but it also means national parks are having more traffic than they really can ever expected. So campgrounds at popular parks fill up within days of them being released to the public, and oftentimes those campgrounds or reservations are released 4 to 6 months in advance. So you could think about in January, June's already full in popular parks, or in um, let's talk about, for example, Grand Canyon. Those could be those campsites and those reservations will fill up early too. So you got to really be on your toes about planning these trips because it's really hard to do a whim trip because you might get there and find out there's no campgrounds available for you. They do have usually some first come first serve. They usually do have some last minute reservations, but it's pretty hit and miss, and more often than not miss. So planning ahead is important. Um, Again, some parks have a really stringent reservation system. It's you have to plan for it 6 months in advance or 4 months in advance. For example, Angel's Landing in Zion National Park, you have to plan that trip out 4 months in advance to even try to get a reservation to do the trip. And it's the most popular hike in Zion National Park. It's breathtaking. I haven't done it, but I have plans to do it next year. So you got to really, in January, know that in April those reservations go out and you need to be there ready to get those. And it's still a lottery system. So even if you put in your application for a reservation, does not mean you're going to get it. That just means you're in the running to get it. So planning is important. So another important reason why planning is so important, at least for me, is I want to be able to see the absolute most I can in a short amount of time. I wake up early, I stay up late, I efficiently try to make my way through the park, planning every detail to the hour. So everyone's a little different. There's people who want to go out on a whim and do something spontaneous. I get it. I enjoy that too. But national park trips, at least for me, is not one of the places where you want to make a spontaneous trip for. I think these things should be planned, maybe not to my level, but planned in advance. Deciding to plan a trip to the national park first, you obviously have to pick a national park to visit. Where possible, I try to see multiple national parks in one go. For example, when I went to Washington State, I did a 12-day trip that encompassed Olympic National Park, Mount Rainier National Park, and North Cascades National Park. All of those days involved a lot of driving. One day was a 6-hour drive from one national park to another. But I was able to see all of them in one go, and that was a really amazing trip, and that was one of my favorite trips to date. Um, Also, sometimes you might want to do two national parks where Yellowstone and Grand Teton are so close together that you might want to do those two together, for example. And I've even done a 24 day road trip where I saw 7 national parks during that time. So I've done a little bit of everything. I've also done where my whole trip focused on one national park. And Grand Canyon, for example, I spent 5 days there, or Death Valley, I spent 7 or 8 days. So your first question is where to go. And I recently planned a trip to Lassen Volcanic National Park in Crater Lake. They're relatively close by. I saw that hitting one, there's enough to do, especially in Lassen, for a full week, but I found it difficult to justify a full week in Crater Lake, so I decided to combine those two into one trip. So once I finally picked a location, I start phase two kind of my planning. I try to learn what can be done in those national parks. A little bit, I try to learn as much as I can about those national parks, because while my trips to national parks are focused 90% on hiking and backpacking, it's by far the activity I like doing the most, and I'm not a huge fan of some of the other activities, but I try to learn as much as I can. What can I do there? Some national parks are heavy hiking focused, but others have rafting, others have rock climbing, others have stargazing, others have canoeing and kayaking and biking. There's no shortage of activities that can be done at these national parks. So I try to learn about as much as I can about the national park and see what I would want to do. While I love hiking and backpacking the most, it's cool to go raft down the Rio Grande, for example, when I was in Big Bend National Park. It's cool to go kayak on a lake in Glacier, for example, or Grand Tetons. In Lassen that I got planned, I am going to be kayaking on Mezzanema Lake. I'm saying that wrong. I know I'm saying that wrong. So my first stop in learning as much as I can about national parks is always this book. It's Your Guide to the National Parks by Joseph Oswald. It's a fantastic book. I cannot recommend it enough. It is my first go-to place to learning about national parks and trying to plan it. It gives you information about the national park. It gives you information about the best times to visit. It gives you a list of activities you could do. It gives you a list of hikes to consider and the most popular ones and the best ones. It gives you information about campgrounds, backpacking permits, entry fees. It just covers everything you would want to know on a surface level. So it's a great resource. So Your Guide to the National Parks typically starts by explaining why your park is unique, and then takes you through the history of the park, from indigenous people there to white settlers to creation of the park. I always find the history of it fascinating. You're going to see in my next video, when I go to Lassen and Crater Lake, I'm going to focus a lot on that history and explaining that history, because I'm a huge history nerd. So I'm combining two areas that I love, history and hiking and backpacking. So next, what I do is I look at the park map in that guidebook, and I kind of use that park map to divide the park into either areas, halves, or quadrants. And I look at it to see, is it best to divide it east-west, or north-south, or northeast, northwest, southeast, southwest. The reason why I do that is because a lot of these national parks may have a southern entrance or a northern entrance or a eastern entrance, and it's not always interconnected with roads. You might have to go from the southern entrance, do everything on the scenic road, for example, and then exit the park on the north and go all the way around the park to enter the western entrance or the eastern entrance. So I divide the parks up that way because it helps me become more efficient. I see, okay, I want to start here on the southern entrance and go through the whole left side of the park. And then I'm going to leave the park and come back, go around and do the eastern side of the park. And that helps me with planning, so I'm more efficient and I'm not going from east to west and spending 2 hours driving when I didn't have to. And so for Lassen, I looked at this map right here and decided to divide the park into east versus west. As you can see, there's a park road that goes through the south to north through the western section with a lot of hikes. But you also have some hikes out in the northeast and southeast. And your guide also discusses a bunch of the hiking options for Lassen National Park, which is discusses your camping options, it discusses your driving scenic road options, it discusses your hiking and backpacking options, it discusses your paddling options, it discusses horseback riding options, fishing options, stargazing options, and winter activities. So that book is fantastic. You could almost plan a whole trip with just using that book. But I go into a little more details. So phase 2 is yet another book, and I absolutely love this book. It's the Falcon Guides right here. Falcon Guides to Lassen Volcanic National Park. It's just amazing book. It describes all the hikes in the national park, or most of them, in great details. It provides you some pictures to see what you'll be looking at. It groups the hikes into zones or areas, which is even more efficient than mine. So it really helps you to make planning easier. It picks an area and says these are all the hikes you could do in this area. It picks another area, it says all the hikes you could do in this area. So it's really great for planning as well. So after getting a good primer from this book, I go to phase 3, which is generally speaking the internet. And this phase has several subphases. The first subphase is simply Google. As you can see here, I've Googled the things to do in Lassen Volcanic National Park. It brings the park, website, the national park website, but it also has 7 must-see sightings, a first timer's guide, so you can see a lot of options here. And then I also do the best hikes in Lassen Volcanic National Park. And here you see all the hikes available to you and people who have done it. There's Barefoot Theory. I use their website a lot. They're really good. There's some others that are really good, but that's the one I'd really do enjoy as well. So I enter the second subphase, which is generally YouTube. Many people have done trips to these national parks, and I like to watch the videos to see what I want to see and what I don't want to see, and maybe avoid at these national parks. They often provide tips and tricks to visiting the national park, and some, if not most, of the parks should be planned out well in advance. So having this information from someone who's been there is very important. So as you can see, there's the very best Lassen Volcanic National Park video, best day hikes, 11 spots in Lassen Volcanic National Park. There's a bunch of videos on hiking Lassen Volcanic National Park. So I go there, and then that's my kind of second subphase, is just seeing what I could see, get me excited to go to the national park. So my third subphase is AllTrails. If you're unfamiliar, this is a great resource. It has GPS coordinates for all the hikes in the national park. People can rate them, so you can see that 4,000 people have done this hike and rated 4.8. It's a really, really great hike, and you should strongly consider doing it. Others have a 3.2 rating with 1,000 people doing it, and maybe one that you might want to stay away from. And when I find a hike that I like, you could star them. So here's the best trails in Lassen Volcanic. As you can see here, it just lists from the highest rated to lowest rated. Lassen Peak, something I am definitely going to do. 4.8 with 4,000 reviews. So I was able to favorite it. Bumpass Pass Hell, 4.8 or 4.7. I'm adding that one. As you can see, it goes down through all the lists of the national park. You can see more trails. It continues down. Now AllTrails is cool because you could see here lists. It allows you to create these lists, and for all the national parks, I create lists of hikes that I want to do. And here you could see a list of all the hikes that I want to do over here, and you could pick them. And it also, the cool thing about AllTrails, allows you to draw a hike that doesn't already exist. So for example, on one of the days, to see all of the eastern side of the national park, I'm doing a 33-mile backpack, and I created this trail system or this backpacking loop by connecting a bunch of other trails. And as you can see, as you are following along the GPS, it shows you the elevation gain, the elevation profile. It's just a really, really good resource. So AllTrails 100% use. You could download it for free. I pay $35 for the subscription, I believe, for a year. 100% worth it if you plan to do more than one national park. And if you do a lot of hiking locally, it's 100% worth it. Get it because it shows you hikes nearby. It gives you hikes that you might not know of otherwise. They're very interesting. So AllTrails is an amazing resource. The National Park website is the final resource that I use in this subphase, and it's really great resource. It gives you a lot of information about the park, about reservation systems. So if you go here, usually they have an alerts, and as you can see, there's an active fire going on in the park. Yeah, I leave in 25 days. So this isn't the first fire in this national park. In 2021, I believe there was a Dixie fire that burned 70% of the national park area. That is an astounding number. And as you can see, there's a lot of fires. This area is very fire prone, unfortunately. So if I were to replan this trip, I would probably go early June when there's still a lot of snow. Because while I have to deal with snow, at least fires probably aren't a thing that early. Every summer it seems like there's a fire nearby. It's going to impact what I could hike. It's going to impact what I could see. I'm a little bummed by this news, but yeah, we're learning this live. So yeah, but going back to the video, so the park here has basic information, like it has a park brochure, the fees and pass to getting into the park, current weather conditions, permits, whether pets are allowed, directions and maps to the national park and how to get there. It gives you kind of eating and camping options if you want to do lodging that isn't backpacking or camping or car camping, front country camping. It gives you camping options, the various places you could camp in Lassen, and you can see in Lassen there's a lot of options. You have Butte Lake, Juniper Lake, Manzanita Lake, I can't even say the word. Manzanita Lake. You have the Southwest Walk-In. You have Summit Lake. You have Warner Valley. You have Lost Creek. These are all campgrounds, established campgrounds that you could camp in the place. There's restaurants that you could go to. So after a hike, you don't feel like doing camp food, you can go to a restaurant. Places to go. You have the hydrothermal areas of Lassen Volcanic, the visitor centers, places nearby that you might want to go to, things to do. And this is where it kind of gives you all the activities. You have auto touring, you have day hikes, water activities, backpacking, biking, parachuting, you have park caching, stargazing, and a bunch of winter activities. So I find this website very, very helpful. And then you have the park news, what's going on in the park, what do you need to know about your visit while you're there. It has photos and multimedia. It has amazing photographs of Lassen Peak in winter, for example. You could see photographs of Bumpus Hill. You could see active webcams. And as you could see, yeah, smoky out there. Then you have, the next two sections are kind of my favorite because I love history. So you got the history and culture. You have the people that were there, whether the Native American tribes, and then later white settlers who come to the area. You have historical places you may want to go to in the park, stories of the national park. So these are individual stories of people there, indigenous people or otherwise. You have certain collections of information. So I find this tab very helpful. And then you go to the nature section, which is all the animals, plants, and environmental and geological features you may see. Lassen Volcanic National Park very clearly has volcanoes. And it's an active hydrothermal area, as you're going to see with Bumpus Pass and Devil's Kitchen. So I find these two sections very interesting, even though I don't know much about identifying animals or plants. I just don't have that kind of memory where I can look at a plant and remember, oh, that looks like a plant like I studied before. So I might print out pictures of the most popular plants that are unique to that area and bring it along with me, but I try to educate myself. I usually fail, but I try. So then there has a science section where you can kind of learn a little bit more, education section, and yeah, so that is the park website, which I find a great resource, and it has a bunch of hikes. For example, if you do plan your hikes, things to do, day hikes, it has a park map. So if you look here, as I discussed, I divided the park up like this. So you have all these parks with the road features on the western side, and I'm going to do all these hikes. And then I'm going to go up to Butte Lake here. So leave the park, go all the way around, probably a 2-hour drive to Butte Lake, camp here, and do this backpack. I think I go out this way. I'm not sure if I cut in this way or if I go around that way. But yeah, you can see the national park, and it has a bunch of hikes you could do in different areas. So it's a really cool website. So all of that is prep for me. And again, that usually takes me, actually, now that I think about it, with the National Park research of plants and animals, that usually takes me, man, probably a full day, probably a full 24 hours over a course of time to create it. So with that, I start the final phase, which is finally planning my national park trip, what you came for. So with all that information, I finally am able to start my planning phase. All of that we just discussed was prep, and usually I take notes, as you can see here. Here for the 2 national parks, I took 66 pages worth of notes. I have everything divided up. I do a little bit of research because I'm always curious to see how many people visit the national park and how does it compare to actual national parks, the size, nearby areas, entrance fee. I try to put it all in one Word document. Alternatives to camping, alternative locations to hikes. I have the hikes with the best view, the best volcanic hikes, volcano hikes, the best hydrothermal areas, the best hikes into Lassen history, so on and so forth, best hikes with kids. I have all of that, and then I divide the hike into sections and all of that. But what I really want to show you now is kind of my plan. And as you can see here, I try to take screenshots of birds that I might see, of animal life I might see, of plant life I might see. Here you see the ecological areas kind of divided. I would love to kind of discuss that in a video, but it's not something I'm good at, but I'm going to try to get better at. The geology of the national parks, you have the hydrothermal areas, you have the volcanoes, you have meadows, history of the national park, I have it summarized there. How climate change has impacted the national parks, the fires that we discussed, the 2021 Dixie Fire, which burned almost 70% of the national park. And here it is. So here's my itinerary. This is a pretty detailed itinerary, as you can see. When I leave to go to San Francisco, when I arrive, what I need to do, get rental car, get my bag, stop by Walmart for food for the first 5 days of the trip, get a cooler for ice, because when I'm front country camping, I try to eat well. I'll get a cooler just for this trip, and then at the end of the trip, so I'm not wasting, I donate it to a Goodwill. I'll get a pan to cook meals, and I'll have steak, I'll have chicken, I'll have whatever I feel like. I'll get another pan to cook some potatoes in. Yeah, when I do front country camping, I do it well. So I have that. It's going to take, 6 hours to do all of that. I arrive at the national park. The first thing I typically do when I'm getting into a national park, I go to see the visitor center. I talk to the rangers. I just like going there. They have usually exhibits for you to look at, history. You could talk to the rangers about current conditions and your plan for hikes and whether they think it's reasonable, if they see any closures. So that's always a good place. And then after that, I go to campsite. So as you're going to see here, I'm at Lake Summit Campsite, Loop A. I end day 2 in a different campsite. And the reason why this is to kind of show you how important it is to plan is I planned this about a month and a half in advance, 2 months in advance of my trip. And that wasn't enough time. I couldn't find, while in the same campground, I couldn't find a single campsite that could cover 3 days in a row. But one was available here one day and one was available there that one day. So that means instead of setting up camp and letting it sit there for 3 days, I now have to, when I wake up, break down camp, move to a different location, set up camp again, all 3 different days. So this is why planning is so important. So my next day, my day 2, you have break camp early for breakfast, go off to Broke Off Mountain, try to get a sunrise at the top if I can. I have the hike number for the book, the Falcons Guide. I have the All Trails link, so if I want to click to it and get my directions to it, you can see that. I have the distance, and I have approximately how much time I think I could do. Since I haven't hiked much, I'm trying to give myself 2 hours per mile. For hiking, I used to be able to do 3. I think those days are long gone. So yeah, I'm giving that. And these are national park trips that I might never go to for a long time. So I plan to really take my time with this, enjoy the hike, take a bunch of photographs, sit at the top at the views for 30 minutes and just taking it all in. It's a little different than my backpacking trips here, where I do enjoy doing hikes. I enjoy hiking and I enjoy the views, but I spend more time on these views than I would on the AT, for example, in a place that I've already been. So after Broke Off Mountain, which is right in the southern portion of the entrance of the western side, I then go to Sulphur Works, which is just right up that main park road. And yeah, I do that. Then I do Ridge Lake at the same time because the trailhead for both of those start in the same place. And then around lunchtime, I have the cooler in the back of the car. I have picnic and lunch near Helen Lake, where you can see a reflection of Lassen Peak, which is a really cool place. And then after that, I go to Bumpus Hill, 2.8 miles. I have the All Trails there. And from there, I go to Lassen Peak, and I maybe stay up there. And this is where I tweak it a bit. I have this plan, but I might stay up at Lassen Peak to see the sunset from Lassen Peak. But another good place for a sunset is near Helen Lake, I heard. So I have that scheduled, and then I go back to my campground and set up camp. And I even have some time permitting. If I have enough time, I could do Mill Creek, which is I think a 2 to 3 mile hike. I don't know if I will, but if I do, I have some alternatives. So then my next day, break camp at 5 to 6, have breakfast, go to Kings Creek area into Devil's Kitchen. Devil's Kitchen is a area on the southwest side of the national park, the Warner Valley. To drive there would have been several hour undertaking each way, at least a 2-hour drive each way. If I'm going to spend 4 hours in a car, I might as well spend 8 hours hiking. So that was my plan. I set off and do Kings Creek Falls. There's a bunch of cool little hikes there. And yeah, I'll do that, and I'll just hike down to the southeastern side of the national park. And here, just to kind of show you, this is a map that I created. Yeah, so I created this map. I start here, I go up to King Creek's Fall and the cataracts, I go down, I go up to Devil's Kitchen and then just retrace my steps back, adding this little loop here for something different. So yeah, that is how I plan to see Devil's Kitchen. It's going to be a 14-mile hike, showing me different areas too. So I was always going to do Kings Creek Falls anyways. So I just decided to add on Devil's Kitchen and hike there instead of drive there. After that, I have a very late lunch, as you can see, and then I have a series of small little hikes that are very easy. And as you can see, another night at a same campground but a different site. So again, I have to waste my time packing up my stuff, going back and setting back up. Here I'm going to be setting it up in the dark. Not ideal. So here is then my move day for Lassen Volcanic. I break camp. I completely break camp here, put everything in the car. I drive up to Paradise Meadow at Hat Creek, do that 3.2-mile hike. I then go to Devastated Trail area, which shows about the history. It's a very short hike, but it's a kind of interpretive trail, so it's cool to see that and see the history. After that, I go to Hot Rock Pull-Off, which is a little pull-off area for a thermal, hydrothermal view. Then I go to, and this is all done by 9:30, as you can see. Then I go to Manzanita Lake, and I go do a kayak for 3 hours, 2.5 hours to 3 hours, on Manzanita Lake. That's going to be something different. Typically, again, I don't like kayaking, but kayaking in a national park on Manzanita Lake with a bunch of views everywhere sounds a lot better than what I could do here in Georgia. So I'm going to do that for a couple of hours. Then I'm going to have lunch at the campground. As you can see, I got a new campground, to a different campground. This is going to be on the northwest section of the national park. So I've done the whole southwest part of the national park, the west side, and now I'm a very northwest part of the national park. All that's left really is the northwest portion of the national park. And here I go they have a museum, so I plan to visit the museum, the Lomas Museum. There's Reflection Lake and Lily Pond Nature Trail, which is only 1.5 miles. I have the all trails for those. Then I have this cool place called Chaos Crags and Crags Lake. This, I can't remember the history of this, but I think this is the result of a very big volcanic eruption. I think of Lassen Peak. So Lassen Peak used to be a bigger mountain that was blown up. And yeah, so that's that. That's a really cool place. Hopefully I'll learn more than I do now. I'm a little disappointed in myself that I forgot so much. And then finally you have Manzanita Lake Trail, which is a loop around the lake. It's 2 miles, so I'll do that. So day 5 and 6, I'm only spending one night in Manzanita Campground. So I then go over and do my backpack. I drive over to Butte Lake. It's a 2-hour drive. I plan to stop somewhere to get breakfast. I even have a place there at Old Station JJ's Cafe. Find a grocery store to get up some supplies that I might be short on. Do a laundromat. There's a laundromat there if I have time. Then I go do my backpack, and that's my 33 miles that I showed. Here, if I go back to it, that's the backpack. So as you can see, this is the whole western side, this is the whole eastern side. I'm going to see most of the eastern side of the national park on this backpack, so I'm excited for that. However, let's say for whatever reason I can't do the backpack. I have all the hikes I want to do as alternatives on day 5 and 6. So I want to do Prospect Peak, I want to do the Cinder Cone, I want to do the Bathtub Lake, I want to then drive down to Juniper Lake and do the Mount Harkness, Inspiration Point, Crystal Lake, and Juniper Lake loop. And since I have a campground on Buford Lake, just in case, I could do both. I could decide in the moment, I really don't feel like backpacking today. I'm worried about the conditions. I'm worried about water. I'm worried about my ability to do 33 miles. I have the ability to call an audible and do something else. So from there, as you can see, I go to Crater Lake, but that's basically how I plan these national park trips. But yeah, so hopefully that helps you and you found that useful. That's how I plan national park trips. I think it's really difficult to plan a national park trip spur of the moment. I'm not saying it's impossible. You can, especially in off-season time. There will be reservations there, but national park trips have a lot of rules and regulations, and it's very competitive to get locations. So my recommendation would 100% be to do some planning. Maybe not to the level that I plan. I think very few people are that OCD about their planning, but do some planning, make the most out of your adventure, and go out there and explore as many national parks as you can. All right, guys. Later.